Hi, and welcome to the Nature and Wildlife Discovery Center. I'm Diana, and you are visiting our Raptor Center today, and joining me today is the lovely barn owl Piper. He is one of our resident birds of prey. We maintain a population of non-releasable birds, which means they are birds that have suffered some sort of accident, leaving them with physical or, believe it or not, mental disability, and that would prevent their success in the wild. So Piper has been with our center now for 6 years. He came in the late fall after we guess being hit by a car. A wildlife officer discovered him on the in a ditch along the side of Interstate 25 south of Pueblo, and thought actually at first he was dead, and he thought, oh, I'll stop and just pick up the body and have it properly taken care of. But when he reached down to pick up the owl body, the owl reached back. So it was interesting when he arrived, because the owl and the officer's hand were both wrapped in towels. So some of us helped out the officer and the rest of us helped out Piper. And when he did arrive, Piper had broken bones in his wing, and actually it's this wing here that's damaged. Piper, his accident, he broke the two bones in the arm. Just like us, they have an ulna and a radius in the forearm. So Piper broke both of those very close to his wrist joint, and then he also crushed the small bones, which would be the bones in your hand, the metacarpals, and unfortunately you can't do a lot of surgery to repair that. You mostly just line things up and cross your fingers and see how things heal. And unfortunately for Piper, he has lost mobility in his wrist, and he's not able to fly. So instead of being out in the wild, Piper stays with us, and his job now is to be an educational raptor. And he does a great job of that. Normally we would be very busy in the spring traveling to schools and things, but with the pandemic, that has all shut down. So I know our birds are feeling a little bit lonely. So we're trying to spend as much time as we can with them. Now, the other thing that we do, of course, is take care of the sick and injured, which Piper was when he came in. And we try our very hardest to help that bird recover from its injuries and return it to the wild. Now, they don't all get to go back. We deal with roughly 250 to 300 injured birds of prey a year come into our center, and roughly half of those birds that come to us do go back, and sadly the other half don't, and that's always a sad day. Yesterday, for example, was a sad day here at the center. We had gotten in several birds, and unfortunately 3 of the 4 did not survive, and that is always heartbreaking. We got in 2 little kestrels, 2 male American kestrels. One of them both hit by cars and had a lot of traumatic injuries, and they both passed. We also got in a great horned owl that had a horrible, we call it trichomonas is the parasite, and it grows in the throat and esophagus. And what it does is it grows, it kind of forms a colony, and it expands, and it causes blockages in the animal's throat, so it can't eat and swallow. And the bird was, of course, starving very, very badly, and he didn't survive either. So it was a rough day. But today it's a good day. So far, so good. Everyone's healthy and doing well. We have also a barn owl in the ICU. Very handsome. It's actually a female, so it looks a little bit different than Piper. In barn owls, unlike most birds of prey, males and females have a different coloration. So in the boys, they have very pale white faces, and then their chest and things are white. Now Piper, he's spotty, and that's individual variation. Girl barn owls, they have cream or buffy colored faces, and then they are cream or buffy on the underside. So she is a lot darker than he is. So we definitely know she's a female. She came to us from Lamar, out on the eastern plains, and the wildlife officer got a call. Some people were working on their air conditioning system on a big warehouse, and they said when they kicked on the air conditioning unit, the barn owl came out and was obviously hit by the fan blade when they kicked on those big fans in the air conditioning unit. And unfortunately, she did have an injury. The wildlife officer was able to recover her and transport her courtesy of volunteers. She came from Lamar all the way to Pueblo. Bless their hearts for making the runs and meeting people halfway. We do that a lot. We really rely on volunteers to get those birds from one place to the other. It's hard for me or the staff that are working here to drop everything and wander off after birds, especially in the summer when we could have 90 to 100 birds that we're caring for. So those volunteers that do transport for us are just we just couldn't do it without them. They are amazing people. So they got her up to us. She does have a wound on her side, and I don't know if Piper will let me touch him, but right under her wing, right here on the shoulder, right there, is where her wound is. It's actually pretty small. It's looking nice. We just cleaned it earlier this morning and wrapped it, put some antibiotic ointments on it. It's starting to close up and it looks good. She's also eating well, starting to feel better, get a little snarky, which is a good sign in a bird prey. If they're being a little snarky to you in the hospital. And the interesting thing is the day after she arrived, she did lay an egg. So she was a breeding female. And unfortunately, we couldn't check back to the air conditioning unit that she was trapped in, because they did remove it because it got damaged as well. So there was no way to check if there were more eggs. Now, she hasn't laid anything else since then. She showed no interest in her egg. So we looked at that and we thought, you know, raising one barn owl by itself would not be a good idea. So we did go ahead and let the egg get cold and disposed of it properly, because we're concerned with hatching just one barn owl. That's a tough thing to do, and we don't currently have a foster barn owl to raise them. Now, if she laid 3 or 4 eggs, we probably would have incubated them, because they'd have each other, and then as they grew up, maybe Piper would pitch in and help with a little bit of raising. But one single barn owl on its own is very difficult, so we made that decision about it. So sometimes it's not always easy, the things that we have to decide, but we always do it with what we feel is the best interest of the bird. So Piper, obviously, we thought the best interest for him would be to keep him. So barn owls are wonderful, and you might be wondering, why was that female in the air conditioning unit? Well, barn owls are a cavity nesting bird. They like to be inside of things. So barn owls will nest in hollows and trees. They'll nest in caves and the cliffs. I know here at the center, down on the river campus, we have huge, tall limestone bluffs. And due to erosion, there's a lot of little caves and crevices and things at the top. And so the barn owls will get into those crevices, and that's where they'll have their eggs. So they are a cavity nester. And of course, as the name says, they will also nest in buildings. Barns in particular, they're very fond of. And if you think about a barn, it's a barn owl to a barn would be sort of like us to a grocery store. So if you think about it, a grocery store for us provides great shelter. It would also provide year-round food, and the same is true in a barn. Barns are filled with mice, and that is the barn owl's favorite food. They love small, furry animals. So gophers, chipmunks, things like that are what they're really into. So they will live in the barn and raise their chicks. Usually they're up in the rafters or up in the hay lofts. They don't really build a nest. Usually they're nest, and they will also take to artificial nest boxes, which is really a great way to encourage them if you're in barn owl habitat and want to encourage barn owls to nest on your property. That's a great way to draw them in. So they really don't create a nest. They just use a cavity, and often it's just lined with pellets. They'll just cast their pellets, and as they break down, the fur and things from that pellet actually will act kind of as a nice insulation for the chicks and stuff to hang out in. So if you ever open up a barn owl cavity, it's usually just layers and layers of fur and pellet remains. So it's kind of interesting to see it. But when they do that, the female will lay her eggs, and barn owls are very prolific. They are a little bit different than most birds of prey. If there's good hunting, they'll actually reproduce potentially multiple times in certain regions of the country. In Colorado, especially out on the eastern plains, we have seen barn owls having chicks in the middle of winter. And that's just because they had a great food source on the ranch that they were in. And then when they do lay eggs, they can actually lay a lot. Most birds of prey, 2 to 3 is a lot for them. But in the case of barn owls, they can lay a clutch of eggs, up to maybe 10, 16 in a clutch. One time we got in a family of barn owls, the youngsters. They were tearing down a building, and they actually were using a wrecking ball. And the wrecking ball took the first swing, and before they could get it going again, someone happened to look in the wall that they just knocked open and saw the owls in there and stopped. And they, of course, couldn't leave the family, so they had to pull it out. So when we got them in, we got, I think it was 8 chicks that were hatched and 6 eggs. So they had 14 potential kids coming their way. We did incubate the remaining chicks, and they all hatched. So we had a family of 14. And at that time, luckily for us, we had a female recovering from an injury who was it was breeding age and actually had been active. She did have what we call a brood patch. They get a naked patch on their abdomen when they're sitting eggs. Anyway, and she actually, when we introduced her to the chicks, she just took them right over. And even though she wasn't their true mom, she said, hey kids, they're my kids, this is great. So she actually, we named her Sophie, and she took on those 14 kids. And that, for whatever, barn owls were doing great that year, because by the end of the season, we had 27 barn owl chicks come in, and Sophie helped raise them all. And so when they were ready for release, we left a few of them here to release with Sophie, so she would have some kids going out into the wild. And they just kept coming. We put a trap door on the cage, and she and those kids just kept coming and going for about 3 months. And if they were in the cage when we fed, they got fed, and if they weren't, they were on their own for the night. So it was kind of cool what they do. But anyhow, when they are nesting, I get off track sometimes, but anyhow, when they do, when they are nesting, they're up in the loft, they lay the eggs, they have a staggered hatch, which means the first egg hatches, and a couple days later, the second egg, and so on. And that's because when the barn owl lays her egg, the first egg, she sits it immediately. And then every day or, well, every couple of days, she'll lay another egg until she has, you know, her eggs laid. So let's just say she's laid 10 eggs. That means from the time she laid the first egg to the last, 20 days has passed. So as they start to hatch, you get the first guy, you get it, the next day, the next guy hatches, 2 days later, the next guy. So in a clutch of barn owls, you could have somebody who's 20 days old, which is almost full skeletal size by then, and someone who's just come out of the egg. So it's really amazing. They just sort of stair step on up when they come in, and it's just incredible to see that happen. So you could imagine in a nest like that, some of the younger ones are probably not going to survive, so they don't all make it. And the older ones, of course, leave the nest sooner. But it's a lot of work for these owls to do. And because it's so much work and they've fought hard to have that site, they are very territorial. So Piper's making a few noises today. He's sort of hissing at me. And that's just his way of saying, go away, you bother me. And he would do that if Piper were in the barn, if he was raising his family. The female might be with the chicks, or he might be. They do take turns. But anyhow, if something were to come into the barn, especially in the evening, that was not a welcomed visitor, usually you would hear that hissing sound. I don't know if I can, he of course won't make it because I want him to, but there we go. Isn't that so cool? Just imagine yourself walking into a barn in the dark, excuse me, and hearing that little noise coming from up above you. And you wouldn't know for sure what was going on. And if you continued into the barn, you might hear that noise and you might hear it escalate, which means it would be getting louder. And actually, the barn owl, as he continues to hiss, if he gets upset enough, he can escalate that into a scream. And these guys, when they scream, it sounds like a human screaming. It's kind of like a silly girl in a scary movie screaming. You all know what that sounds like. Anyway, but they'll have that screaming noise. And if that's not enough to scare you away, I don't know what is. So it's just amazing what these guys can do. And if that isn't enough, if screaming and hissing at you from above doesn't work, the barn owl does have another tactic. And that is to come swooping out of the rafters, screaming, and just pass right over your head very close. Sorry, and that can be quite intimidating because, let me see if Piper will open his wings for you. If you notice, on his underside, he's very pale. He's white. So just imagine that this white thing comes streaking down, hissing and screaming at you, this white thing, and goes right over your head. You just feel the breeze and the white object going by. That would be very scary, and if you were smart, you probably have run out of the building. And you might have thought, I just got attacked by a ghost. Because that's what these guys look like. They just look like these little ghosts coming screaming down out of the rafters after you. They don't really harm you, but they do want to scare you. And off you go. And then, you know, you tell this barn is haunted. There's all this stuff going on. And that was actually one of my first experiences with barn owls as a kid, was seeing a barn owl come streaming out of a building at me. It was very scary. But being curious, I eventually learned that it wasn't a ghost at all. It was just a family of barn owls in the barn defending themselves. So they have this amazing way of scaring you off. And it's very, very effective. And it's why a lot of houses and old barns and silos and things often are called there's people say they're haunted just because barn owls live there and they hear all these weird noises. Barn owls don't hoot. There are very few owls that actually hoot. Most owls have screams and whistles and clicks, things like that that they're making, but very few of them hoot. So if you're out at night, and barn owls, of course, are very nocturnal. When you look at an owl, usually when they have dark eyes and they have a very strong facial disc, and that's this circle pattern of feathers around the eye, it usually indicates that they're very nocturnal. So if you want to see barn owls, good luck. You either know where to live them or where to find them during the day in a barn, or you're out running around in the middle of the night. But usually before you see them, you'll hear them screaming, and it's pretty crazy. You'll just go, who is getting killed out there? It's just the barn owls out hunting. Sorry about that. Allergies today. Anyway, barn owls, of course, being owls, have great tools for finding mice. I mentioned the facial disc, and that's their tool for helping them to gather sound so they can listen for their prey. They also have large eyes so that they can see well in the dark. So that's an awesome tool for them. Their feathers are very soft and fluffy, and that allows them, they actually have this little bit of, let me put him up here where you can see, they have this little bit of fraying or fringe on the edges of their wings, and that soft fray or fringe, along with a very silky feeling feather, actually allows them to fly very silently. So Piper, when he comes down, if he wasn't screaming, you wouldn't even hear him come. You would just see this white object swooping down at you. So he's silent. I like to think of owls as stealth bombers. They're out at night, so no one really can see them coming. Plus, they fly silently, so you can't hear them coming. And the prey doesn't even know the owl is there until it's too late and it's been caught. And of course, what all birds of prey have are talons to catch and kill their food. So he has all these amazing tools to help him be a bird of prey. And he is just an awesome guy. And I have a very kind volunteer, Coralie, thank you very much, who's going to give me a drink of water. I am well taken care of by my wonderful volunteers. I couldn't do it without them. They're so sweet. So anyway, being a barn owl, it's a tough life. You got to hunt a lot of prey, and also a big issue for them. One, loss of habitat. A lot of times when we rebuild a barn structure, we no longer build it out of wood, which means there might be rotted spots where the owls could get into. We now make them out of steel, and it's hard for the barn owls to get into. So that's a problem for barn owls. It can be easily alleviated, though, if you're putting up a new barn. Maybe put up a barn owl box on the outside. You want these guys around. These guys eat a lot of mice, and they are a tremendous value. Lately, barn owl populations aren't as prolific as they've been because we've had a lot of drought. Rodent populations are down, so these guys are right down there with them. It's sort of a cycle up and down of both predator and prey. But there are some years where we see lots of barn owls, and we have to find places for those chicks to go. So we're always looking for landowners with barns and old outbuildings that we can release them into. Some landowners are really cool about it, and they're like, oh yeah, we want them, bring them, bring them, bring them. Others like, I don't want those. I don't like owls. They're just bad. And you have to convince them. And if you're successful, and you actually convince them to let you put it in some building way out in the middle of nowhere where no one ever goes. And it's funny, and I've done that with this one gentleman way out on the Eastern Plains. I tried for years to let release barn owls onto his land. He had huge acreage, and I thought, oh, this is perfect barn owl habitat. And finally, it took forever, but the wildlife officer, I wore him down, and he let us do this exactly that. Some old outbuilding in the middle of nowhere they never went to. So we drove out there with him, and the wildlife officer and I put the little barn owls up in the barn, and oh my gosh, we just walked into the barn and mice everywhere. They were running across our feet, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is heaven for a barn owlet family. This is great. We put 4 youngsters in there. 2 weeks later, the landowner called, and he says, you got any more of those things? Because they had cleaned out the barn. It was awesome. So we have placed about 20 barn owls on he's about 80,000 acres. So we've placed a lot of barn owls with that landowner over the years. So it was really nice to have them go. So that's one way to help them out. Also, another issue for them is pesticides, in particular rodenticides. It's very dangerous to use things like decon, and there's some newer ones out there that the chemicals, they do kill the mice and rats very effectively, but unfortunately the compounds that they're using to kill the rodents don't break down. They remain in the animal's body. So for a barn owl, if he finds one of those dead or dying rodents and he eats that rodent, he's also going to get the poison. And if he eats enough of that, it actually will kill him as well. So we do have to continually do research and find better methods of destroying rodents. In fact, like I said, if you're a landowner and it's barn owl habitat, put up a nest box, because this is nature's best rodent trap. You could never come up with a better way of alleviating rodent problems than barn owls. They are just fabulous birds of prey and very enjoyable. Well, Piper, of course, very handsome fellow, and he and I have enjoyed speaking with you today. If you want to learn more about the Nature and Wildlife Discovery Center, please visit our website, which is hikeandlearn.org. You can also, if you have any questions today, I will be very happy later on this afternoon to sit down and look at questions on Facebook in the comment section and reply. I'm very happy to do that. Or you're always welcome to give us a call at the Raptor Center, and that number is on both our Facebook and our website page. So thanks so much for joining us today. Things coming up. We'll be in tomorrow, and I'm not sure who's up tomorrow, but I will check. I haven't planned that far ahead. But next weekend, we're planning, I hope, either Saturday or Sunday. I'll keep you posted with a post. Oh, look, he's going to cast his pellet. Oh, this is great. When birds of prey, watch this. There's going to be a pellet drop any second. Come on, Pi, you can do it. There it goes. Woohoo! Oh, and he got the tail of the rat too. Oh, that was just charming. When birds of prey eat their food, they can't digest everything. So what Piper just did is he regurgitated the undigestible materials like the fur and things. And that's a great place to end. So maybe tomorrow we'll talk more about pellets. But thank you guys so much. Be safe out there. Be well. Take care of yourself and others. Wear your mask. Stay social, practice your social distancing. Keep healthy. We all want this to be over so that we can get together again in person and be well. Hopefully we'll see you in a few weeks here at our Raptor Center. Get out and enjoy this beautiful spring day. Take care.